In 1942, the most dangerous secret in the North Atlantic was not hidden inside a submarine. It was written on Allied paper. A convoy would leave New York under blackout orders, carrying tanks, fuel, food, aircraft parts, and men who had no idea that their course had already been seen by the enemy. In London and Washington, Allied trackers stared at ocean charts and tried to guess where the U-boats were hiding. But in Germany, naval codebreakers were reading where the convoys were going. That was the imbalance. One side was hunting through fog, the other side had pieces of the map. And for months, the men losing ships could not prove why the enemy kept appearing in exactly the wrong water. The story most people know about wartime codebreaking is a victory story. Bletchley Park. Enigma. A handful of brilliant minds turning German secrets into Allied advantage. That story is true. But it is not the whole story. Because while British and American analysts were trying to read German naval orders, a German naval intelligence unit was reading Allied convoy traffic. Not perfectly, not always completely, but often enough to matter. The unit was called the B-Dienst, the German Navy's intercept and codebreaking arm. Its most dangerous man was Wilhelm Tranow, a career radio specialist who had been attacking British naval systems since before the war became a world war. By the time the Atlantic campaign reached its worst year, Tranow's people were not learning how to break Allied naval traffic. They already knew how. The book that mattered was Combined Naval Cipher No. 3. It was supposed to help Britain, America, and Canada coordinate convoy movements across the North Atlantic. It carried the kind of information that could decide whether 50 merchant ships arrived in Liverpool or disappeared one by one into cold water. Around the end of 1941, the B-Dienst got into it. Not in a clean, cinematic way where every message opened perfectly, that is not how this usually worked. They could recover fragments. They could read enough headings, positions, times, and routing language to build a picture. Sometimes, they could do it within hours. And in convoy war, hours were enough. Then, in February 1942, the disaster became sharper. The U-boat arm shifted to a new Enigma system called Triton by the Germans and Shark by the British. It used a 4-rotor machine. The older system had used 3. Overnight, the Allied submarine trackers lost their best window into U-boat orders. For 10 months, Bletchley could not reliably read the traffic that told German submarines where to gather. So the Allied side went blind on the boats, but the German side did not go blind on the convoys. That was the cruel shape of 1942. The men trying to protect the ships could not see the wolf packs. The men commanding the wolf packs could often see the shipping lanes. Karl Donitz did not need every detail. He did not need a perfect map of the sea. His war was a tonnage war, a race to sink merchant ships faster than Allied shipyards could replace them. And a convoy route was not just information. It was time. A slow convoy might make 7 knots. A faster one might make 10. A surfaced U-boat could move much faster. So if a submarine already knew where a convoy would be, it did not have to search the Atlantic like a needle searching for thread. It had to move early. It had to wait. This is why the leak was so deadly. The Atlantic was enormous. Storms could scatter ships. Fog could swallow a horizon. A convoy could be hundreds of miles from the nearest enemy and still be safer than it looked. Because distance itself was supposed to protect it. But distance only works when the enemy is guessing. Again and again, Allied routes were changed to avoid suspected danger. Again and again, danger seemed to move into the new path. A convoy would be bent north around one reported submarine line, and another line would be waiting north. It could be explained once, it could be explained twice. A surfaced U-boat might have sighted smoke. a German aircraft might have spotted the convoy. Radio direction finding might have betrayed a ship that transmitted too long. Traffic analysis might have narrowed the options. Every single case had an excuse. The pattern did not. By 1943, the German reach had grown even more uncomfortable. Some U-boats carried trained listeners who monitored the voice traffic between convoy escorts. The hunters were not just watching the ocean, they were listening to the shepherds. Still, suspicion was not proof. And in war, proof has to survive the people who do not want it to be true. The British had built much of the Allied code-breaking system. They were protective of its secrets, and with reason. If Germany ever realized how much of Enigma had been read, the damage could be enormous. But that caution had a cost, because admitting that the enemy had broken an Allied naval cipher meant admitting that the convoys themselves might have been fed into the trap. The man who finally forced the question into the open did not look like the type of man who would decide a campaign. His name was Kenneth Knowles. By the spring of 1943, he was 38 years old, quiet, bespectacled, and not built for the Navy's usual mythology of command. The Navy had pushed him out years earlier for medical reasons involving his eyes and ears. He did not come back as a destroyer captain. He came back as a man who could look at a mountain of messages and reduce it to one deadly conclusion. Knowles had been sent to London to learn from Roger Wynne, the Royal Navy's great U-boat tracker. Wynne was not a sea officer either. He was a barrister by training, disabled by childhood polio, rejected for sea duty, and placed in a cramped tracking room where his mind became a weapon. His staff called the room Lenin's tomb. There, on a huge Atlantic chart, colored pins marked pieces of the invisible war. Red for confirmed U-boat positions, white for uncertain sightings, blue for locations calculated from radio bearings. Wynne did not have the full truth. He had broken pieces. But he could read patterns in the pieces. He called some of his estimates useful fictions, which was a modest way of saying that his guesses often saved ships. Knowles watched that method, learned it, and carried it back to Washington. In December 1942, he set up an American tracking room in the main Navy building on the National Mall. Its designation was plain, F-21. The work was not glamorous. Collect decrypted German signals when they existed, collect direction-finding bearings, collect reports from aircraft and escorts, collect sightings, rumors, positions, gaps. Then make the ocean speak. In a way that made fighting men uneasy, one escort commander who used his forecasts before sailing called him almost a soothsayer. Not because Knowles guessed magically, but because F-21 kept telling ships where the hidden danger probably was. That reputation mattered, because the conclusion Knowles was about to push upward was not convenient. In December 1942, Bletchley finally broke back into shark. The blind period was over. London and Washington could once again read many of Donitz's orders to the U-boats. Now the trackers had something field commanders did not. They could compare two maps. On one side, Allied convoy routing signals. On the other, German orders moving wolf packs into position. If the Germans were just lucky, the pattern would be loose. If they were reading the convoy cipher, the pattern would tighten. It tightened. The German Navy did not direct its submarines with ordinary latitude and longitude in the way most civilians imagine. It used a grid system laid over the Atlantic, with lettered and numbered squares. The grid references were also disguised and shifted, so reading an order meant reconstructing what a code like a particular box actually meant in water. But the tracking rooms had worked on that grid patiently, signal by signal, bearing by bearing, fix by fix. When a German order told a group of U-boats to move to a grid square, F-21 could place that square on the same chart as the convoy route.
And too often, the pins met. Not near a convoy by chance, not in a broad area where many routes might pass. But in the water, a specific convoy was going to enter. That is when the secret stopped looking like bad luck and started looking like a leak. The proof arrived during the spring crisis of 1943, when the Battle of the Atlantic reached its highest pressure. March had been catastrophic. About 120 merchant ships were sunk, nearly 700,000 tons of shipping lost. The convoy battles around HX-229 and SC-122 became the largest of the war, with dozens of submarines gathering against formations trying to cross the ocean under escort. A British report later judged that Germany had come closer in those weeks than at any other time to cutting the ocean link between North America and Britain. That is the scale of the danger. This was not an intelligence puzzle for its own sake. If the routes kept leaking, Britain could be starved of the material needed to stay in the war. By May, 2 eastbound convoys had left New York for Liverpool, HX-237 and SC-129. Waiting ahead were German patrol lines with names that sounded almost calm on paper. Rhine, Elbe, and Drossel. During the fighting around those convoys, U-Boat Command sent several highly guarded signals to its boats. The Allied codebreakers read 3 of them. Knowles's analysts placed those German messages beside the Allied routing dispatches. And the match was not subtle. The German orders reflected Allied route information so closely that ordinary explanation began to collapse. Not a lucky sighting, not a vague patrol estimate, not just traffic analysis. The enemy was reading the mail. Now F-21 had to do the unglamorous work that wins bureaucratic wars. They got access to the 10th Fleet convoy in routing files, the actual Allied dispatches that had sent the convoys across the Atlantic. Then they laid the German messages beside the Allied originals, line by line, route by route, timing by timing. They identified which messages had likely been compromised and pushed the evidence up to Comminch, the office of Admiral Ernest King, Commander-in-Chief of the United States Fleet. The conclusion was accepted. That sounds like paperwork. It was not. That acceptance meant the highest level of the U.S. Navy could no longer treat the convoy leak as rumor, weather, bad luck, or nervous overreading by analysts in a basement. It meant thousands of dead merchant seamen had been sailing through an ocean where the enemy had been handed the direction of travel. And it meant the cipher had to die. The Allied system was not a simple partnership of identical instincts. British leaders were often more cautious with code intelligence. They feared that acting too obviously on secret readings would warn Germany that its own systems had been penetrated. The Americans, especially Admiral King, pushed harder to use what they knew. In April 1943, King and the British First Sea Lord, Dudley Pound, had already traded sharp messages over how boldly intelligence should be used. Pound warned against risking something too valuable. King argued that intelligence not acted upon was not being fully used. Neither man was entirely wrong. But on the convoy cipher, caution had reached the edge of disaster. Combined Naval Cipher No. 3 was finally retired. On June 10, 1943, Naval Cipher No. 5 went into force. The route window closed. By then, the wider campaign was already turning against Donitz. Escort carriers, better radar, long-range aircraft, improved tactics, and restored Allied codebreaking were all changing the battlefield. May 1943 became Black May for the U-boat arm, with more than 36 boats lost. Donitz pulled his wolf packs away from the main North Atlantic convoy lanes. No honest account can say that the cipher change alone broke the U-boat campaign. The truth is messier. German convoy knowledge came from several braided sources: broken cipher traffic, traffic analysis, direction finding, sightings, and operational experience.
But the broken Allied book was part of that braid, and when the book was replaced, one of the enemy's most dangerous advantages was taken away.
The uncomfortable question is why it lasted so long. Because the British had received warning before May 1943. Through another intelligence source, they had learned in August 1942 that German codebreakers were solving convoy ciphers. Yet combined naval cipher number 3 remained in use for roughly 10 more months. That is the part of the record that refuses to sit neatly inside the triumph story. The Allies could react quickly when they had to. Earlier in the war, when a different Royal Navy cipher was compromised, a replacement had been brought in within months. So the capability existed. But for the convoy system that guided merchant ships through the worst ocean battlefield on Earth, the change came late. That delay is not a clean villain story. It is worse than that. It is an institutional story. The kind where every caution has a reason. Every delay has a file. Every alternative explanation sounds responsible. And the men in the water keep paying while the proof is assembled. Kenneth Knowles did not stop the Battle of the Atlantic by himself. No one did. The campaign turned because of shipyards, escorts, aircraft, radar, intelligence, training, endurance, and the hard learning of thousands of sailors who had no choice but to keep crossing. But Knowles and the tracking rooms helped make the invisible visible. They showed that the enemy was not merely finding convoys, he was being guided toward them. After the war, Knowles passed into the world of American signals intelligence, into an organization the public would not even be told existed until decades later, the National Security Agency. He died in 1986. Historians have credited the tracking rooms run by men like Knowles and Wynne with helping destroy more than 90 Axis submarines, many through American hunter-killer groups. Knowles never commanded a warship. The Navy had once decided his eyes and ears made him unfit for the service it imagined. But from a room full of charts, pins, bearings, and intercepted messages, he noticed the thing commanders needed to know. The U-boats were not appearing out of nowhere. They were arriving where the paper told them to go. For months, the Allies thought they were steering through fog. The truth was colder. The enemy had the map. And the war changed when that map was finally taken out of his hands.